Republicans and Democrats have promised us the world. Medicare for all, no child left behind, equity, safer streets, and police reform, an end to the housing crisis, a more peaceful world, and a sound economy. Government is the barrier to all of these things. If you're sick of the lies, fancy slogans, and broken promises, then join us in the Libertarian Party of California and help bring a real free market to the Golden State and help set every individual free. lp.ca.org. That's lp.ca.org. Hello and welcome back to Libertarian Los Angeles. I'm Sean Osborne, and today Tom Woodard is joining us. He's going to be one of our candidates running for governor out here in California. How's it going, Tom?
Fine, thanks. And thank you so much for having me, Sean.
Yeah, my pleasure. I guess you want to tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I've had a pretty interesting life. I've lived a little over a third of my life outside the United States, 4 years in the Dominican Republic and another 20 years in Mexico. And I say that, but it's actually, I lived in Southern Baja, which was part of California at one time. And so really it was all California, even though I was gone for 20 years and working down there. Mm-hmm. Father of 4 children. My son's deceased 5 years, and I have 3 daughters, and I live in Carlsbad, California now. I just relocated at the beginning of this year.
Oh, okay. So you moved back to California and you saw what shape it was in and decided to run for governor. What would you say is the number one issue that made you want to run?
I think it's a combination of things. I'm from California. I was born and raised in California, went to school at San Diego State, lived 14 years in San Diego County. And I think one of the things that inspired me the most was my son developed mental illness and then drug addiction at the age of 20 and died at 37, and at times was homeless, and I was his sole source of support. And so going through that with him was a major factor in my life, and then seeing him pass away was very, very critical. So it taught me something about a really sinister problem that we face as a state. I tried to seek all kinds of help, and every program and rehabilitation and in and out of halfway homes and all that. And so that was one motivator. But the other is just California's become so dystopic compared to what it used to be, and I'm really concerned. I'm motivated by a big concern, and that goes on many fronts, as you can imagine. I think you probably would share some of those with me.
Yeah, I'm right here in the middle of close to downtown Los Angeles, so I see it all.
Yep. Oh, my dad worked in downtown Los Angeles his whole life, and so spent a lot of time there, going to the office with him, et cetera. So,
obviously California has a huge problem with the housing crisis and homeless issues, and a lot of that is due to drug addiction and mental health care. Well, as governor, what would you like to see happen from a libertarian point of view?
Well, one of the things, the housing the homelessness crisis in California is a problem that it's estimated that between 75 and 80% are addicted in some way. to some kind of substance. And a lot of times they have what's called a dual diagnosis, which is an underlying mental health issue. So it's really important to separate the people that are economically homeless or situationally homeless versus the ones that are chronically addicted, and they're really living out a life of addiction on the sidewalks of our streets.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would address both of those populations very differently, but they both need a lot of help. As far as the addicted population, the ones that are, shooting up and living on the street and kind of chronically addicted and possibly mentally ill, I would institute that a mandatory 90-day detox and a medical evaluation done through private sector providers. This would not be a state-run. It would be a state-defined, but not a state-run operation. One of the things I found the hardest is the laws are against a concerned relative like a father, because if somebody is not a danger to themselves or others, and that definition of danger has morphed over the years. I mean, you would have to have a major psychotic episode publicly to be actually arrested and go to some kind of a detention center where they deal with you, because there's just no room. And I tried to have that happen with my son at one point, and it was almost impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see it. I work for the parks out here in Los Angeles, and I see a lot of behavior that would normally get somebody arrested, and it seems like they don't do that. That's where I would say government could step in, and if somebody's doing something inappropriate, like tearing things up, or like, for example, one guy was out there with a hammer breaking up the sidewalk at the park, and the cops never came and got him. I think that's a perfect opportunity for the cops to be able to step in and put somebody in some sort of program or something, because we can't force people to get medical treatments and stuff like that. But if they're committed a crime, that could be part of whatever rehabilitation or something. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I agree. Anybody see city streets, or we need to re-envision what our cities are for. They're residential, they're businesses, they're centers of commerce, et cetera. And we can't have a society where we have, first of all, the dangers of having just rampant homelessness on those city sidewalks, living, defecating, shooting up, which leads to a lot of petty crime a lot of times, and sometimes serious crime, to even fund their existence. So, and their habit. At the same time, we need to realize that that's a societal imperative. And to deal with that, we need to have strong enforcement of drug laws. At the same time, the whole drug issue is something that I deal with quite separately, because it's a bigger issue. It's related to all kinds of things, but we can't allow for that. And we have to have laws that are on the books, and also a pathway for people that are in that situation to get the help that they need, but not the way that the government has done it in the last, for example, 6 years, when California spent over $10 billion on the homeless problem. And a lot of times all that is finding very expensive housing deals and kind of housing them in places where they're really not getting any rehabilitative help in any way. That doesn't solve the problem. It kind of kicks the can down the road, and that's not what we need. We need action. We have 187,000 estimated homeless in California, which is a third of the entire homeless population in all of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to react. It's actually, I think, an emergency that needs to be cleaned up, and it needs to be worked on and attacked and enforced on an emergency basis.
So when you say like the drug laws, like what do you mean by that?
Well, you're shifting gears a little bit, but we have the drug use it bleeds over into homelessness, so it's related. It's also related to a much bigger problem that we have, which is the consumption of sometimes very dangerous and illegal drugs that are coming in from outside the country. All three of those are a component of the same problem, but we have a pretty good analog. If we go back 100 years ago now, we'd be right in the middle of prohibition, which started in 1917 and ended in 1930. One of the reasons that they stopped prohibition back then was because it engendered so much criminality that it was no longer controllable or enforceable. And the reason it engendered criminality was because all you do if you take a demand for a substance, and human beings' desire to alter their brain chemistry is part of all of human history. I mean, we do it with exercise, we do it with coffee, we do it with tea, we do it with alcohol, we do it with sports, we do it with all kinds of things, adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to take away that desire. You're not going to take away that impulse or that desire to be in an altered state at times. Human beings are going to do that. And even if you pass laws that prohibit it, all you're doing is driving the supply of that underground, like what we did with prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mexico right now is prohibition on steroids, where because of the demand from the U.S., which is a street value of estimated over $300 billion a year, and California has 10% of that, by the way. All we've done is drive underground the provision of those drugs to that impulse, that human impulse, and taken it out of the formal economy, so it becomes criminal to supply it. Well, when it's valuable enough, criminals will always step up and do that, or people that will break the law for some kind of reason that they can justify in their mind. They're destitute. Mexico as a country, although it's the 10th largest economy in the world, has a per capita income that's only 1/6 of the United States average.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the same thing that drove it in the years of the Depression 100 years ago. People that were poor and had no other options would migrate towards the criminal side because they could make money at it, and they could justify it, in any one of a number of ways philosophically. I would ultimately, as a libertarian, I would work to legalize all the street drugs that are not dangerous, that are not lethal and dangerous, similar to what Portugal did around 25 years ago. And Portugal, because of that, they reduced their percentage of their population that was addicted by 40% in that time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would also do something radical, and this is a bit of a libertarian idea, and that is I would incent with tax incentives and everything to have pharmaceutical companies develop recreational drugs that were safe and possibly not as addictive. That hasn't been done before because all we've ever done is react to the natural elements that were found in the environment and produced, historically, and then we reacted against them by largely prohibiting them. Today, though, we're dealing with Mexican drug cartels are now the largest, most sophisticated, wealthiest criminal empires in all of human history. And we need to understand that dynamic. And yet, if you go to Mexico, that empire could not exist if it weren't for the American demand. And so I would legalize as much of that demand. I would bring it into the formal economy where it can be taxed. And also quality standards are set, just like any other substance that we are prescribed, et cetera, or that we use. And I would also craft some kind of a moratorium for cartel members that hadn't already committed heinous, criminal crimes within the United States. A moratorium against prosecution if they would agree to the new rules, maybe become the suppliers of legal substances, et cetera, and reinvest. Just like what happened, basically, major criminal empires were birthed by the prohibition of 100 years ago, but they ultimately morphed into oftentimes legitimate businesses and everything. Several of them still exist today in morphed form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like when you say, I guess, when you say dangerous drugs, I mean, somebody, you're going to always have some conservative or something like that says, I mean, I'm from Indiana, and they still won't make weed legal there because they still need evidence that it's not going to kill you or something like that. So, I mean, I'm sure you're talking about things like fentanyl when you're talking about dangerous stuff. And, fentanyl is something that as far as I know, I don't think people intentionally take fentanyl. Drug dealers add it to their product to make it more potent, so people will want it more or be addicted to it or whatever. And I always try to talk to people about how, like, you don't have liquor store owners adding fentanyl to their whiskey to make it, stronger for people, because it's legal, and there's, it goes through a certain chain of things. What is that kind of what you're talking about?
It is, but you brought something up interesting. I mean, consider this: we accepted alcohol back into our life and into our culture in 1930 with the repeal of prohibition. But we have between 3 and 4% of our population are alcoholic, and so we have to deal with that. And I imagine that there are, we're going to find there's other things with weed, and which has become prolific, and other drugs. But I'm talking about the lethality, like your crystal meth can be lethal, and so can a lot of other things. I'm not an expert on all drugs, but fentanyl, I understand you can buy pure. At times, some people do use it and mix it themselves, but I just think things like that should not be in the lexicon of available drugs. I also think drugs that are any more dangerous than cocaine but still available should be prescribed, maybe even cocaine. I'm really open to some medical input right now, but those prescriptions, especially if prescription technology morphs into AI for auditing and things like that, you can track addictive patterns and anomalies, and it could help us as far as not lubricating a legal addiction market, which today is enormous. The legal drugs, the proliferation of legal drugs that are addictive has been part of the problem, along with illegal drugs. Illegal drugs are not the only thing that is clobbering the population. There's quite a few people that are addicted to legal medications that are quite addictive. They become epic stories now, like some of the opiates that come in pill form, et cetera.
I know a few people who fit that description of, they get hurt at work, get back pain, they take Oxycontin or something like that, get addicted to it. Next thing you know, they can't get it anymore or something, so they end up on heroin. So I mean, I know a few people that have had stories like that I've known in my life. So there are I don't know. It seems if you leave it up to somebody to give a prescription for something, like say something like Oxy or something like that, where they can only do it for so long, because like some people only have the option to be in pain or to take something like that. When they run out of the option of being able to take that, or doctors don't want to give it to them because somehow they're going to be held responsible for this or that, then the person ends up resorting to the black market, and that tends to not go well, because that's not a safe product, because it's been cut with things, and just the dangers that go along with dealing with the underworld, I guess.
What you just said was exactly what happened to my son when he was 14, living in Park City, Utah, and he was training in ski jumping at the Olympic Center, and he broke both legs in a ski accident, and ultimately his legs hurt so badly. We broke at the femur at the growth plate when he was 14 and had a pin put in, and ultimately as he got older and it hurt so badly, he was given opiates, and then he was able to get them on the street, and that was part of how he got addicted.
Yeah, because it just seems like once they have to go to the street, it just everything tends to spiral downwards. Obviously, like alcohol. I mean, there's probably a lot of people out there that have become homeless because of alcohol, but we don't make it illegal because of that, because alcohol kills a lot too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, just that the whole concept. I wish more people would listen to what libertarians have to say about that, because I think it's a more compassionate thing. We don't want to just lock people up for it, but if you do go take some kind of drug or alcohol, and you go out on the street and you do something crazy or hurt somebody, then that's what you should be held accountable for, not necessarily the drug. And if we held people accountable in that way, then they could get the help that they might need in a way that they kind of brought on themselves, as opposed to us going out and kicking doors in because somebody has weed or cocaine in their house.
What we have to do too is understand, and I wandered through 3 cities, including Tijuana, the drug zones, and found my son each time. One was San Diego, and one was Salt Lake, and among thousands of homeless.
Uh,
And I learned a lot from that experience. And what you're saying is right down the line. There are actually some people that are addicts and probably might be beyond help. I mean, no matter in our modern rehabilitation systems and rehabilitation is super expensive and has a very high recidivism rate.
mhm.
But it's not a crime problem. It's actually a personal issue. It can turn into crime. Addicts a lot of times resort to petty theft or actual more serious crime to fund their addiction. And so it covers like a whole spectrum of activity that's illegal, but most of the time it starts with personal tragedy and personal addiction. And we need to be really smart about how we address that. But one of the things that I learned from my experience with my son is there was no way that I could get him forced into a detox. Where
Mhm.
after 90 days, he could not only detox, but have a medical assessment and also counseling to see where he goes next. Some people would have to be maybe interned. Other people would have to be put on certain programs, maybe work study or, work sobriety programs, et cetera. It should be done through the private sector. It should not be state run.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of, down here near downtown, there's like for me as a disabled person, blind person, it's very difficult for me to walk the streets because some streets are just the sidewalks are completely taken over by homeless people, and I have to get into the street to get around it.
Mm-hmm.
Totally not safe. But some of the homeless advocates think, oh well, they have to have someplace to be. Well, I also have to have someplace to walk. I have to be able to get around. I mean, sidewalks, the taxpayer money pays for it, but they're not meant to be someplace to sleep on. I mean, I can even think of one guy. I was walking home from work, and he was laying long ways across the sidewalk, and I tripped over him and kicked him. And I mean, I felt really bad for the guy because he was a mess. He was drunk as hell, and he started crying and thinking that I was beating him up because I kicked him. And he's like, "Why did you have to do that?" And I felt terrible for the guy, but I'm like, "Man, you're laying across the sidewalk. I mean, I didn't mean to do it, but it's unsafe for him and it's unsafe for me." And that's where I would say that's where government needs to step in, whether it be the cops or whatever, come and get somebody if they want to get social workers down there. But the person's obviously in distress and having some issues. And
It's not compassionate to spend $10 billion since 2019 on the homeless issue and not affect it as a matter of fact, it's increased substantially, like 25% in the last 5 years in California. And it needs to be viewed through a very different lens. And you can't just throw money at it. It won't solve anything. And we need to take a very libertarian view of it. I think the only programs that would work would be a private sector driven, possibly with some public financing. First of all, detox programs and then rehabilitation. And if they're not rehabilitated, then more serious penalties, and more serious, maybe lockups for a long time in a different kind of detention where they can't be with society because they could be violent or they could be disruptive or damaging or something like the guy with the hammer example that you said.
mm-hmm.
But we need to be really smart, and they did not need to spend that money. I actually think it's a boondoggle, and I think the money's probably gone to a lot of quote providers of services that aren't having any impact at all, or expensive hotels for homeless people to live in that $200 a night, I've heard, and that should not be happening. That doesn't do anything except waste taxpayer money.
Yeah, I mean, they could have bought. I mean, for how many billions did you say it was?
It's 10 billion since 2019.
Yeah, I mean, you think of how many. I mean, not that I would want the government to do that, but I mean, if you just do the math and you think how many houses they could buy for $10 billion or apartment complexes and things like that. I mean, they could have housed a lot of people for $10 billion permanently, but
right. But it's, again, housing is not if you just give people housing, then they have a place that they can go and live out their lives addicted and drugged.
right.
And it will not help them, and the house will be totaled most of the time
Yeah.
and not maintained, et cetera. It wouldn't be like you or I would consider our lives in a house. It would be something very different.
Yeah, you would. Well, if the government was buying houses too, then that drives up prices for people who are buying it, and you definitely don't want that house next door to you, right?
No, it would have to be segregated in order to, and also because of the providing of services to these people who need help.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it's very different among the homeless population, but there's a good 20% that probably are not addicted and they have other issues. And so once that's sorted out, there should be laws against homelessness on the street in cities. It just should be it should be prohibited. If you're found that way and you're intoxicated, you're consigned to a detox program for 90 days, mandatory. And if you're found and that's not the problem, substance abuse or et cetera, then you're consigned to having a full analysis of what your problem is and then sent down different channels. I also have researched the housing problem in California and have some solutions on that. And one of the solutions would fit transitional communities from homeless to full-fledged homeownership. We have an advantage right now in that we're in the United States. There's been a proliferation of technology and micro housing and modular housing. And I probably have a file of 25 different companies, and they make homes all the way from as low as 650 square feet up to, and one bed, basically one bedroom flat, up to 3 bedrooms. And these go all the way up to 150,000. But communities of that built on state-owned land that was made available to solve a housing crisis would actually serve more than just the homeless population. You're talking about Gen Zers that can't afford to buy anything. They can't even afford to rent. And yet, if they could get into a house that costs $65,000 all in with some kind of financing on 99-year lease state land, et cetera, you could literally you could house everybody. You could have 90% housed in the state within 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the state would have to participate. I also believe that's an emergency. We're losing 100,000 Gen Zers a year to immigration out of the state. And that's the future entrepreneurial class and, the class that's going to engage new technologies and invent new things and be the new motor of the new economies of California in the future. And we can't afford to lose them.
Mm-hmm.
And I consider that an emergency too. By the way, Gen Alpha, which is after them, and also millennials suffer from a lot of the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
All the way into the millennial years right now. It's very difficult for a 32-year-old to land and make it with the prices the way they are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm on the Libertarian Party of California's program committee. We're going to be having a show coming up on that at the beginning of the year for the new program once it gets accepted. But I wrote the majority of the plank that we have on the housing issue and talking about getting rid of rent control and those kind of things because it makes less housing available. Are those things that you would also like to push, like zoning laws and stuff like that, so people could build better on their, or easier on their?
Yeah, absolutely. I philosophically am opposed to rent control because I don't think the government should try to solve a problem by superimposing some orthodoxy on the private sector.
Yeah.
I believe the markets, if they're left alone, would be able to handle the housing crisis in California. And I just gave a good example. I mean, I've followed some of the companies from inception, like Boxable and some of the others, and there's fantastic, interesting little homes that are built. They're not very big, but when you're young, you need a place to go that's comfortable, that protects you from the elements, that you can, in some kind of sense, have friends and family see you, et cetera, and where you can work from. It's your home base and it's yours.
Mm-hmm.
So I have several programs of how they can acquire those homes, and also where they should be built. And the other thing is for our immigrant community, if we build homes that were at that level of affordable, that you could start it all in with 65,000, and you're now need maybe a $20,000 down payment or better. There might even be other programs, because developers would not have a land cost, and the houses are already approved. They don't have this big approval process or environmental approval process. They do it once at a factory, and then that same model is shipped everywhere. It's already been approved.
Mm-hmm.
So you lower a lot of the costs that are built into building a house now, and you take away a lot of the delays, and you have a ready-made house. Somebody can go to a showroom and see exactly what it is, say, yes, I'll take one, or they can go to a development that somebody's put in. And the state has almost 900,000 acres near population centers that they own that aren't being occupied, that would be suitable for these types of developments. And they could be made pretty. They could have common amenities, just like a regular development, et cetera. I believe in my plan is called California 2051. So I'm looking a generation ahead from the election year, which is next year in 2026. And I believe that we can build 15 million homes in that time, and that there will no longer be a housing shortage in California. I also believe on an almost emergency basis, we can build 3.5 million by getting companies involved, giving tax benefits to these companies that create and have designed modular homes so that they do their assembly in California. That would create another 405,000 jobs. And those homes could be put out to the public in a record time, because they can build them so much faster and they're so much cheaper. Actually, the price would go down the more that they build. And that's a major addition to what we've considered housing in the past. I would not agree with any kind of rent control. I think that's antithetical to actually, if nobody's going to build or speculate on rental income housing when they can't charge enough to even make it, which is typically a lot of times what happens after the costs are factored in for rental houses, and then people can't afford to rent them.
Yeah. Well, even like right now, Newsom just made the air conditioning and stuff mandatory. So, or they have to. I think they're trying. I don't know if they finished it or if they did it, but they want to make every apartment or housing unit have a stove and stuff like that. And me as a, I guess it's not just because I'm blind. There's blind people that cook, but I do not cook. I would rather have a place without it and have it be cheaper. And they're taking away that option from somebody like me who doesn't cook and doesn't need a stove. I ultimately have to pay for one because Newsom feels the need to force that. And that's also another stupid thing that drives me nuts.
Well, this is just an example of it's really a secular theocracy where the government is totalitarian enough to start mandating the details of people's personal lives. And I think that that's, here we are in the United States right now. We're living in the middle of several revolutions all at once. But one of them is like Mamdani, who just was elected mayor of New York.
Yeah.
With the promise that somehow retooling socialism, it's going to work this time. It's never worked. And part of the reason it's never worked is because it destroys the incentive that comes from the private sector. And when you capacitate the brilliance of all the people in California, the private sector, they will rise to the occasion. They're tremendously talented. There's incredible people in the state, like everywhere. And instead of trying to tell them and dictate to them what they have to have in their life, you should give them the freedom to have the tools and the environment where they're not so restricted that they can't function. You don't have the gas prices and the energy prices and the rent prices and the cost of living being the highest in the country. And that's why we've lost over 1 million people in the last 6.5 years from California. That's why we've lost 2 congressional seats in Washington. And they're just going to keep perpetuating this secular theocracy based on all kinds of narratives that are really questionable. And I believe that it's our obligation almost to create a libertarian revolution. because libertarianism is personal responsibility and personal freedom, and counting on the private sector for their initiative, not mandating it from on high, which always minimizes the amount of creativity and expansion that's possible economically, educationally, in all walks of life. It should never be mandated from up top.
No.
Give people the freedom to function, and we should protect them, and that's it.
Yeah, Mandami, or how we pronounce his name, he said he has that quote that went kind of viral where he said, something along the lines of there's no problem too big for government to solve or too small for government to care about. And that last part of it really drove me nuts because that goes to the stove issue. I don't need him to tell me if I need a stove in my apartment or my house. I don't need him to tell me those kind of things. I don't need somebody to micromanage the way I live my life.
That's right. Nobody does.
Yeah, it just drives me nuts. Then they might have his heart might be in the right place, but his brain is just out in la la land, and I'm sure they have some of them have good intentions, and other people just like to control others, and they put on the mask of somebody that cares. And I
that's the thing. I don't. By the way, in my campaign, I just mentioned his name, but the thing is, what I'm really antagonistic to is his policy. I find that people that are really convinced of their perspective and believe it wholeheartedly, that's one category. There are other people that I believe are convinced of a perspective that will give them power over others. And I kind of stand against that, but I'm not here to argue with anybody. I'm here to promote a vision of the future, and everything about my vision is doable. It's doable with today's knowledge and technology and with tomorrow's knowledge and technology. And that is the antidote to the other kind of revolution, which is more government control and totalitarian control of almost everything in our lives, and the dictation of certain aspects of our life that brings with it a hefty price tag, like what California labors under today.
Mm. Yeah, I think your message should resonate with a lot of people who maybe don't identify as libertarians, because it's something different, and it might bring them towards libertarianism. Because you have the experience of trying to help out your son and dealing with government and all that stuff, and a lot of people come into this trying to solve a problem that they've never had to deal with, and you've actually had your hands in it and had to work on those kind of issues. So I think it gives what you say a little bit more gravity than, say, a Newsom.
Well, the other thing is it's coming from the private sector, and I've had an interesting life in many ways, and I've learned a lot of lessons. And you gain so much perspective when you live outside the country and you see other places. A lot of people talk about how bad the United States is. There's a reason people are breaking the doors down trying to get in.
Mm-hmm.
And if all you have to do is spend time in other countries that aren't so well off, and you would immediately do what I did once I got back from the Dominican Republic when I was gone like 6 months, and I kneeled down on the ground, kissed the ground when I came back, because it was like I had spent a lot of time in Haiti at that point, and oh my gosh, I've seen people in abject poverty and misery and suffering under the consequences of poverty, and it is not pretty. It is dire.
Yeah, I've been, my mom, she was a travel agent, so I traveled a bit through the Caribbean and stuff like that. And, I made friends with some kids down there, and, they took me to, their house, and their house was basically like a blanket with a stick holding it up, so I saw these little shanty towns, and, as a kid, and I came back home, and I was like, damn, we got it good, compared to, like somebody living in a shanty town and stuff like that. That's some wild stuff there.
I had an experience where I volunteered to work with hurricane refugees in 1980 in the Dominican Republic with an international relief agency, myself and my young wife. And a Category 5 storm had hit late 1979 in the Dominican Republic, and it had displaced 40,000 people. So we were put in this little mountain town that had 4,400 people, about 10% of that, displaced by the mudslides. Because they had deforested the watershed, because back then and now, charcoal and firewood were the main cooking fuels in the country. And that led me to found a nonprofit in 1984 that's now working in 10 countries. It's 41 years old, and it's working in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and Mexico in reforestation with small farmers, lending them money to convert to tree cropping. And they now are approaching 90 million trees that they've planted, and their nursery has produced another 105 million for other people that were growing. And it's lifted a lot of people out of poverty, but it's also restored watersheds, and that's exactly what we tried to do. So we had several problems. We had poverty necessitating the need to go cut trees down, which led to deforestation and mudslides and displacement of people. Destroying the environment always leads to environmental degradation, largely leads to poverty at the end. Mm-hmm. And by using an economic private initiative through a nonprofit, by loaning them money, and they turned out to be very creditworthy. I mean, there's a very low rate of those recipients of those loans that don't pay them back, and it's had an enormous impact. And it's going to go into another country this year in Asia, either the Philippines or Cambodia. They're looking at both right now. So that was just one example of how you can look at certain problems. And California has several of these, by the way. The reason that our fuel is going to be an estimated $6.25 a gallon in 2026, and it could go up to $6.50 a gallon on average, is because we came up with rules based on a narrative, and we've shut down 9 refineries since 1990, or 11 refineries, but we've shut down 4 in the last few years. So now we're importing 24% of our fuel from China. And we say that we're cleaner now. We're not emitting all the emissions, the CO2 emissions. And yet in China, where they refine fuel, they're way dirtier than we are. So we've offshored our emissions and said that now we're clean. But it's one in atmosphere in the whole world. So yeah, actually more carbon going in the atmosphere. But I also believe personally, I'm not a real advocate of global warming based on atmospheric CO2. But the most natural way to fix atmospheric CO2 is to plant trees. So I'm proposing that we would expand what today is known as the CCC, the California Conservation Corps, and turn it into the California Conservation Corps Alliance, and raise it from about 10,000 inscriptees every year to about 50,000, and have the term go 2 years, and make a large majority of that, like 80%, dedicated towards trees and tree planting. California has enormous areas that need reforestation. By 2051, that program, which would cost $6 to $7 billion a year now, but I find the savings and other things more massive savings. They would plant 3 billion trees, which would fix all the carbon that California generates and most of what France generates as well. Just by planting trees. It would also restore environment, water flows, watersheds, habitat for wildlife, et cetera, in California. And it would give jobs to the same generation that we're driving away right now, where they could work for 2 years. They would get room and board, and this is all through private providers that have regional and local knowledge of what the needs are and how to manage them. And after 2 years, they would have a $30,000 scholarship, which they could apply towards more modules in learning, or they could apply towards a down payment on a modular home or something like that. And this is a generation that then would start at 20 years old. They've already learned something, a real skill. They've had an experience outside, which a lot of youth today are missing. And they would have an enormous impact on the state. They would also be involved in fire control, and an elite team of them might be even firefighters, but brush control and wetlands restoration. And if we did that, we would restore a lot of water flow in California, by the way, because of the effects of having more tree cover in areas that have been overlogged or burned out by massive fires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like what you're saying, because a lot of people think, as libertarians, we would wreck the environment because we don't like regulations. And I always try to explain to people, regulations are nothing but loopholes for, corporations and stuff to give them advantages over others. But people don't usually think of libertarians as environmentalists, but people who are very anti carbon fossil fuels don't realize if we didn't have fossil fuels, the only other way to heat things and cook your food is to chop down more trees.
Well, Sean, you just said something that's historically provable. So if you look at maps of like England in the year 1000, the year 1200, it was largely deforested.
Yeah.
And mankind since the peak of the last ice age 20,000 years ago has deforested through human activity 1/2 of all of the tree cover on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
It was estimated between 6 and 8 trillion trees, and there's 3 to 4 trillion trees now. And what saved, like you take Puerto Rico, it was completely deforested until the U.S. implemented Operation Bootstrap, and they established factories in Puerto Rico in the 50s. It pulled people out of the countryside into factories. Now Puerto Rico is reforested on its own naturally. The same with the northeastern United States. The same with many places. Like the United States is not essentially a deforested country. It's third world countries, and they lie in tropical areas where those trees grow faster, they fix more atmospheric CO2, et cetera. But until about 1850, the world was going downhill on the deforestation until the advent of the use of hydrocarbons. Now, I think we need hydrocarbons for a while, and they're the cheapest fuel by weight. So when you're talking about flying or things like that, it's very important. But in the future, we're going to have fusion reactors, which are not dangerous like fission reactors, and that's not the too distant future. But in the meantime, we should have the cheapest fuel possible. So I've developed a plan for how to get there.
Yeah, you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I like when you're talking about the deforestation, I always think of I love to read about history, and I remember reading a thing that you could go from Paris to Prague and not see the sun because you'd be going through so many forests. And it's just Europe's not like that anymore. Germany is down to the one really big part of the Black Forest left, and they were wanting to tear down part of that for a coal mine. Or you think of Lebanon and the cedars, that most of their ancient cedar forests are gone. They've chopped all that down. Or the Romans deforested everything around Jerusalem. They scorched earth the place. So a lot of places just over the last 2,000 years or so have really we have altered that, and it's not because of fossil fuels; it's because of chopping down trees.
It is, and when mankind developed agriculture and became sedentary, that's when they cleared a lot of land for agriculture. They used it for housing. They used it for fuel. They used it for weaponry and bridges and installations. But also, you just touched on another interesting fact. I had an archaeologist friend tell me that when they uncovered an ancient building, they could tell approximately the era it came from by how narrow it was, because they no longer had trees that were big enough to cut beams that were long enough to have certain spans. So then they had shorter and shorter spans that were longer and narrow.
Oh, damn.
And I found that very interesting. But wood is very useful, and was useful to mankind when they came out of tribalism and started societies based on agriculture and became more sophisticated in some ways. And so this is something that we've been a deforesting species. We're responsible for half of the trees in the world, tree cover in the world being gone. Mm-hmm. You think about that, trees transpire water. They get it from deep sources. Their roots are very deep, and they basically suck up groundwater, and they use it as a medium to transport nutrients up to their leaves, and then they get rid of the water in the form of vapor. Mm-hmm. Water vapor in the atmosphere has over 600 times the heat trapping capacity of CO2. And not only that, it's a lot more. It's almost about 1% of the total gases in our atmosphere, whereas CO2 is about 4/10,000ths of the atmosphere. So it's very much smaller, and water has a lot more heat trapping capacity. So what we've done in the last 20,000 years has added to about a 6 degrees centigrade cooling, because we don't have those trees generating that water. Now it's complicated. They take heat and they give it off into the atmosphere, but they also trap more solar heat. And so they net cool the planet in all. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. If California replants 3 billion trees and also does the necessary remedial work to clean brush, clean forests so that they're not so fire prone, especially near residential areas, builds fire breaks so that they can combat intense large fires, et cetera. They could do it with the California Conservation Corps Alliance and all these youth that can spend 2 years and they can gain a head start on life and maybe have a down payment on a home or a business or whatever they want when they're done. And by doing that, I would erase on an emergency basis the CAPS program, which has cost $13 billion since 1914 to Californians at the pump. I would erase the carbon capture technology requirements and the environmental fuel requirements for refineries to get started, because I do not believe I don't believe, and I can defend this. I know it's a controversial subject. I don't particularly believe that atmospheric CO2 that's anthropogenic, meaning man-generated, is the cause of any kind of runaway global warming. I think we're actually in a dearth of carbon, and that happened in the Carbonaceous age when organisms developed that used carbon like to make shells like mollusks, and now it's limestone or coal like trees. And now over 3/4 of all carbon is now in the earth. And then in the oceans is 60 times what the atmosphere contains. If we would plant 3 billion trees in California in the next generation, so that by 2051 we have planted 3 billion trees, we would fix more atmospheric carbon than all of the programs times 10 that they've tried to institute in California. And we would lower the price of gasoline to $4 a gallon right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think about like the when people talk about climate change, just because two things are parallel with each other doesn't mean that there is causality between the two things. A logical fallacy, because I mean, the climate has changed, just in the last 11,000 years over and over again. We had the medieval ice age, the little ice age. You had
the mini ice age and the medieval warm time. But also, I ask people this question all the time. See, the thing is, the climate change narrative has been promoted when it got politicized.
Yeah.
And yet, if you ask hard questions about the science, there's some very simple questions people can do their own research. And I asked the question, like, how much have the oceans risen in the last 20,000 years since the peak of the last ice age? Well, the answer is 410 feet. How much did it rise in the 20th century? About 1 7/8 inches. Uh-huh. We're in what's called an interglacial minimum period, where we're still in an ice age, but it's the minimal amount of ice, and we're at the very top of it. And it's the coolest one we've had for several cycles back. And it may be because we don't have the trees and the water and the environment. But I also say, if you've become convinced and you want to save the planet, and you think that the biggest issue is climate change, and you don't want to listen to any people that they call deniers, that even if they have scientific arguments and understanding on their side, okay, just come plant trees with us, because it's nature. It solves many problems at once. It creates environment, habitat, water restoration, water flows, shades soil, so we have soil organisms, so there's a more mineral uptake by the plants, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a more natural solution than anything else that there's all these schemes, and hey, we're going to suck carbon out of the atmosphere, and don't do that. That's where we get oxygen. Please don't do that. And that's where we get photosynthesis and all that. So I also think that there has to be a big education on all the issues around that theory. That theory is very flawed, and yet if you even bring it up as with any kind of questions and hard questioning or scientific evidence, you're labeled a very non-scientific label, a politicized label. You're a denier.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to be either. I just want to solve the problem by planting trees if it's a problem. And if it's not a problem, plant the trees anyway.
Yeah, I like the fact that you care that much about the environment. Can you talk to the people a little bit about your the nature preserve that you did down in Mexico, or what?
Yes. In north of Loreto, I was the founder of a project that set aside 19,000 acres and also 7 miles of coastline in a bay that's very prolific. It's being studied by marine biologists over and over now in the last 6 years since we did a biodiversity assessment. And uh, a representative that was under the supervision of Scripps Institute of Oceanography told me it's the most speciated body of water they've discovered on the both Baja coasts in 25 years. And so we set about to preserve it in perpetuity, and that's what's being done right now. And I founded the project and I managed it for 18 years.
You know, it's one of the things that I love to point out to people is that the private sector can protect land. You can have government owned land, but ultimately somebody else, you know, the next person down the line can come give that away, sell it, do what they want with it. You know, so those kind of things, when you have government agencies in charge of things, you don't know who's going to be in charge of it in 10, 20 years or 50 years down the line. But something like what you're working on, you know, it's set aside permanently to be what it is.
Well, the other thing that I would allude to, it's an adjunct to your question, but you know, solving the water problem in California would also solve some of the fact that we've created a marine near coastal biome desert in the last 200 years. Now, it's estimated we have 10% of the plankton production because we've shut off the flow of nutrients into the ocean, et cetera. Well, I would say that the water problem that California has, by the way, is another crisis. And I mean, it's a crisis. It's not, it's something that needs to be dealt with aggressively. It's an emergency. And I would decouple the about 80% of the domestic use of water from agricultural sources, so that when there's drought years, you do not have a drought with 80% of the population, and the drought would be more easily managed by the agricultural production of the agricultural producers of California. This is important because California's agriculture is a backbone and a core business in our state economy. It always has been. California has an enormous capacity for agricultural produce. And the way we designed the water system in the 40s and 50s, which we still use today, is not resilient enough to handle the population growth that we've had and the needs that domestic water needs that we have as a state. I would establish a series of 30 desalination facilities going all the way up the coast with modern desalination techniques. I think for the first 20 years, you'd have to couple them with power that's probably from traditional power, maybe natural gas power plants, and then convert to we should be squarely in the middle of the fusion revolution by then. The first fusion reactor, commercial fusion reactor, is scheduled here for 2027 in the world. In 2028, there's another one. And this is not dangerous nuclear power like people think of fission. It's very different. It can't melt down, and it doesn't have all this nuclear waste and all that, but produce very cheap electrons then. But in the meantime, if we desalinate the largest, the ocean, with modern brine re-injection systems, which I know a little about because we researched them in Mexico, you do not have any environmental impact if it's done completely right and it's done with the new modern systems. You can't even measure the salinity difference in a modern injection system, a meter, 2 meters away from the injection point. And so by doing that, we would take away these battles between agriculture and domestic use. And it might raise by $60 a month the domestic water use bill, but it also would, it would create all these other benefits. Like if 25% of that outflow then went to restoring flows down our watersheds and wetlands, then it has a very high estimated value. It would bring back like half of the plankton production that we used to have. And we have such a problem now that migrating whales and everything actually face starvation when they're going off the developed California coast now. I know because I lived in Mexico and saw them when they hit the end of their journey from the Arctic down in the lagoons of Baja, and I saw them calving and mating, and I saw them up close. I even touched some of them, and they come in mass, but some years they come very thin because there's not enough production of
Yeah,
their food stuff.
see the whales down there at Puerto Negro before too. It's beautiful down there.
Incredible, yeah.
Yeah, that's like I said. I think all these policies that you're talking about should resonate with people here in California. I hope we can get your message out there to people. I like the stuff you're saying.
Well, thank you so much.
You know, one I guess like when you're talking, like, I don't know, because like I live here, we don't have a lot of green areas down here by me. We have something called the Flat Top, and it's owned privately by different people. So, you know, some people in the neighborhood are trying to preserve it. And then we have Deb's Regional Park. Like when people start talking about like building the small houses, I know a lot of people fear that we're going to lose more green spaces in that sense. What, like, you know, the trade-off is we get more housing, but we lose some more green spaces.
Well, here's the problem. You still have these people in the state, and sometimes they're packed like sardines into very small area. You know, young people I know, or a lot of times they're sharing incredibly restricted spaces. I know immigrant families are. I've seen that firsthand.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about micro homes, you're talking about human beings that are their average living area per human being is much reduced. It's not like traditional homes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's comfortable and it's doable.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in a house for 7 years in Mexico that was only 690 square feet, and it was fine. I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had access outside, and there were paths to walk on, and there were trees and things like that. And I know firsthand that that's doable, and I also know that as a starter home, a lot of people are just concerned that they don't have their own place, they don't have their own freedom, they don't have their own environment or their own vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And they're forced into living situations that don't enhance their productivity or their restfulness or their education, etc. And I believe that we need to retain those people in our state. We're not going to do it with the current housing schemes that we have. We're not going to do it at $250 a foot to build, you know, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the cost of building a home in California is because of the restrictions on the state. Like the environmental qualification can be challenged by anybody. You could apply to build a house in a town. Let's not say Pacific Palisades right now. Let's say you're up in Whittier, okay, and you somehow find a place that you could build. Somebody from another town could challenge your design, and as far as environmental sustainability and all that, and that could take you a year and a half before you could sort it out.
Mm-hmm.
Not be able to do that. And one of the things that a modular home offers is that people can locate and be there pretty quickly and be housed fairly quickly. Who does that serve? It serves Gen Z, Gen Alpha, millennials. It serves immigrants. It serves the elderly. And you could have communities specifically dedicated to any or all of those, or a mix, et cetera, according to what is called for in the area that you're developing. And California has 40 million people. If you count the uncounted people that they have, which they don't have on official records, it's probably closer to 44 million, 43.5 million. By 2051, it'll be over 50 million. If there's any kind of growth at all. And if it's not, you will have a state that is destitute of young people. It will not have a tax base. It won't have businesses. It'll be in debt even more than it is right now, which is crazy.
I know.
It's like in my plan, we would implement AI in governance in a lot of governmental functions, and also implement a very different education system. But anybody displaced by that, because AI would take their job, they would receive a very good severance, but also a scholarship for the future where they could either use it for school or housing or whatever. And I'm talking about anybody from all those systems. But we're going to need them. They're not going to drive them away. But we can't have this unholy alliance in education using a 450-year-old system, build a big campus and have people come and sit at the feet of masters at an enormous cost that they can't really afford, but they can get finance, and then they owe money till they're into their mid-40s. When really, it's the revolution that should have happened with the electronic age and hasn't, because we've clung to this model that we've always had of how schooling should be done. One size fits all. Everybody goes through the same system. We already know enough about how humans learn and that humans are colored differently in their learning capabilities, and also their gifts, their giftedness is different. And so if there's an assessment done between 6 and 9 years old, twice a year, so that ultimately modules of learning that they can decide on. In other words, whatever government funding exists now, whatever private funding exists from them in the future, to get modules, they can decide on what they want to spend and what modules they want to take. And that module stacked up would be their credential for the rest of their life. It would even include adult re-education and ongoing education. But it would be done through private providers. And we would do away with these large campuses, except for community social events and sports and drama and things like that, where they could come and get together. But it would not be the system now where, it's 8 to 4 in the afternoon every day, and you go and you sit through these classes, and you have all the issues that have made California now the highest state in the country as far as what they spend per student. And they're 35th in reading and 38 in math.
Mm.
We're failing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an educator. I'm a music teacher, so I couldn't agree more. I just think the whole idea of the way the educational system works is antiquated and broken. I'm a big follower of John Taylor Gatto. I love that man. Just talking about how every student is different, and people need to learn how to learn, and those kind of things. And
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and we're never done. I tell my students all the time that I said, I'm
never done.
I've been playing music since 1980, and I'm still learning. I have teachers, and they're always surprised that I still have teachers. I'm like, yeah. I mean, you always find people. Whether it be a different style or some other thing. I got an argument with one of my friends who's a communist who thinks that I just don't want people to be educated, and he was arguing with me like he said, where would you learn how to do music theory if you didn't learn it at community college? I said, the same place I learned to play guitar, at the local music store. That's the market. And it was far cheaper for me to learn guitar that way than going to UCLA or something like that.
Well, what happened too is the parties in the two major parties in the United States circa 1988, 89, 90, 91, it became a trend to say that everybody deserved a higher education.
Yeah.
And so they formed, the laws that now were the government-backed student loans.
Yeah.
Well, the real cost of an education since I graduated way back in the last century in 1979 has gone up by over 350% in real dollars. And they've added a tremendous amount of administration, and this in the electronic age, where you would think that we would have achieved some kind of efficiency where we didn't need as many administrators. We have way more. We're administration heavy. Just like the state of California, the government is administration heavy on a lot of functions that never got touched by the revolution of electronic technology and the ability for remote learning and all that. Now, there's some great groups that are breaking out. This one, Vela, is very interesting, where they do, private teaching of essentially modules, et cetera. Charter schools have shown that even the school approach, right applied, can, when applied correctly, can have tremendous results. But I believe that education needs to be customized. It needs to it needs to follow the person according to how they learn, what their gifts are, and what they envision in their life, and at a young age, what their parents envision in their life to help them. And once that happens, that they may take a very different route than their neighbor, they can still get together and play sports together and relate in other social activities, and so that they have that those socialization skills. But they need to be taught and audited so that they really are learning the things that are going to help them have a career and be able to be productive citizens and be able to have the knowledge base so that they can be the citizens of the future. And right now, that's not happening. Now, it's not just the school's fault. It's also the social breakdown that's happened in the U.S. and the discipline resistance of kids nowadays, et cetera. But we're not going to solve it by grouping them all together and trying to force a one size fits all into, because it will not work.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I even think about, like when I'm teaching piano, like not some of the students don't read as well as others. I have to work with them the way that it works for them. Or, like if I have a kid like myself who's visually impaired, obviously we have to work a different way. Every student's a little bit different. You can't treat everybody the same. When I was in school back in the 80s, they tried to stick me in the same block as everybody else. And I always crack this joke, and I mean, I'm dead serious about it. They kicked me out of the music classes because I wouldn't cut my hair. They kicked me out of the radio and TV classes because I couldn't read the playlist, even though I offered to take it home and memorize it. They wouldn't let me do any of that stuff. And, those are the things I still do today. I still play music. I do my podcast, so it's kind of like my radio show, but they let me take driver's ed. the one thing I still don't do. I know, I still don't drive.
Yeah. Well, when I was in Mexico, this is an anecdote. I'm sorry to go off the pace a little here, but when I got to Loretto, there was a very interesting guy that was a local guitar player, and he played really well, and he was blind. He had been blind since 12 years old, and when he was into school for handicapped in Mexico City, where he was studying, somebody gifted him a guitar, and he learned to play it himself. He never read music, and he just learned by ear, and he was amazing. And so I and a group of friends sponsored him to cut his first CD.
Uh-huh.
And we made a deal that he was going to have to pay us back so much per CD. But then when they all came, we told him it was on us, and so it was no cost. And that CD, everybody in town had one because he was so good. And it was a great experience. He just retired like 6 years ago. But he was quite an icon in town.
Yeah, that's cool. And that like you said, somebody who's blind, if they are encouraged in that way to do that, I think that's great, because then a lot of it's funny because a kid told me the other day, or he asked me, he's like, how can you do that if you're blind? I said, actually, it makes me better at it, because I get the muscle memory faster. I don't have to see it. I can hear it, just like I'm talking to you. And it blew their mind. I was like, yeah, it actually just makes it easier for me, because I still have to work harder at it, but I do learn music faster because, that my world is more sound oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So, I say take your if you have a handicap or if you have a certain thing, that can also lead to something else that makes you stronger at something else. It doesn't necessarily mean you're weaker at everything.
Mm-hmm.
Just might be stronger at something else that you might not have noticed or anything like that. And I think schools absolutely miss that these days.
I've always said and I taught my kids this, I think everybody walks with a limp. And I also think everybody has superpowers, most everybody. And, it's like finding, we just talked about education. I think finding that particular child's superpowers and enhancing those and playing to those is the route for education. And it's the route for a lot of things. And I think we all need each other. We're all differently gifted.
Yeah.
And, we do better when we can cooperate. And that's why my campaign is not going to tell everybody how terrible I think so-and-so and such is, or how stupid their platform is or something. I'm just going to talk about the future and what's the art of the possible, and compare it to what we're doing today with no names. And they can take as many pot shots as me as they want. It's like I don't really care.
Yeah.
And I had the experience of my son passing away after all that trauma of 17 years, and watching that, it gave me a resilience about what's really important in life, and a belief in that. And that's what spurred me on to do this run for governor in California, and to get the message out of what California could be. And
Yeah.
that we can dream together. I don't care if you're progressive. I don't care if you're conservative. I don't care if you're independent in the middle of the road. I don't care who you are. We can envision things together that we agree on. And that may be the first place we can start in a long time, to start agreeing. And then we can get to work together.
Yeah. Yeah. Mutual respect in that sense, just
Exactly.
don't try to control my life.
Yep.
One of the things you mentioned was the AI. Where would you see AI helping out? Because I mean, obviously there's a lot of things for it, but it scares the hell out of some people.
A lot of people don't understand it yet, and that's what they're mostly. What you don't understand is easy to fear always. I would use AI to radically revolutionize governance, because we're very top heavy with people and with bureaucracy, and there's going to be a revolution in AI that's profound, and it will change mankind forever. It already is. And I think that government can change in parallel to it, or can resist it and try to stay in its Stoddard past, but it's not going to work. It's never going to work. And people are tired of, the debts that California has run up, the unfunded liabilities that California has run up are, ludicrous, and they're very, very detrimental to any kind of programs or anything else that the state can do. It's going to hamstring them, and it already does. And I think that by replacing a lot of functions in government with AI and having people that oversee that, you can cut the headcount down tremendously, and at the same time save a lot of money. Now, where would that money go? First of all, there's nobody that's going to be displaced that wouldn't have a really good opportunity, because I don't believe in just shuffling off people into the future with no hope or aspiration, or no pathway to how they're going to survive and thrive in the new economy. Well, I would propose for everybody that has that kind of displacement, an 18-month account where they get for 6 months 100% of their pay that they got in their position, and for the following 12 months 50%. But at the end of the 18 months, they would get, or during the 18 months, they would get a $30,000 scholarship. Could be applied to education. It could be applied to a housing cost. It could be applied to a business startup, or anything they like. We're going to need everybody in the new economy, because what I'm proposing would generate a whale of a lot of jobs. If we locate, I haven't talked to you about transportation, but if we locate just the housing market here of building modular housing, and we are able to attract the top companies to the state with some kind of tax benefits, et cetera, and maybe state grants or long-term low-cost leases for land for test centers and manufacturing and all that, we would really prime the pump of the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Create a 50,000 per year workforce in this new CCCA. We would create 50,000 new careers a year with every graduate, as soon as the program was spitting out graduates. And so there's a tremendous opportunity in the future California. And in transportation, I also have there's another radical revolution going on, and we need to be in sync with it. We need to understand it, or we're not going to be the California of the past that led the nation in a lot of innovation. We're going to be the anchor that didn't lead anything. And that is that there is a revolution going on a lot of people aren't even aware of, and that is flying vehicles for personal transport. There's electric flying vehicles being developed even by some very good California startup companies like Joby. And there's also traditional fuel vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. They're called VTOLs. They're eVTOLs if they're electric, or VTOLs if they're traditional. And I would also attract them to the state. Manufacturing, R&D, the whole industry should be here, as should AI. So We need to be an energy-rich state. We need to have all the water for the future population and everything like that we need, and we need to decouple it from agricultural needs so that we become the agricultural powerhouse we always have. They will also undergo a revolution because of AI and robotics and everything. And robotics is another industry that California should dominate.
Mm-hmm.
We don't today because of our tax structure.
Right.
And that's something that has to be addressed. But the reason we have the tax structure is because we're spending too much money. And we're spending too much money because in some ways we have this theology, secular theology or theocracy that we're trying to build based on ideas that have no place in a free society. They have no place in dominating governance in a free society. We need to be nimble. We need to be thrifty. We need to be opportunistic. We need to be visionary. And we need to be strong about our convictions about where we're going in the future and implement it. And if we do that, we'll no longer have this strangulation that's going on right now, where businesses have fled the state and are fleeing the state, and people are fleeing the state, and they're tired of the cost of living, they're tired of the crime, they're tired of the things that they have to put up with where government is not reacting to their real needs. And I think that we can do a lot better. And I think, by the way, this is a time, it's the advent of an age where if libertarians mobilize, and they explain what libertarian vision is and what the libertarian freedoms, freedom to act and also personal responsibility. If we promote that, people are looking for a different way than the two major parties, which are at war with each other in a cultural war that's going to go on for the foreseeable future.
Yep.
We can be the people that kind of heal in the middle, everything, and at the same time have strong values that we're promoting that will actually get us out of this.
Mm-hmm.
I read an interesting statistic because I worked starting in the 1980 with the very poor in the world, right? Well, 1980 was 45 years ago. And let me see, am I right? Yeah, it's 45 years ago. And 45 years ago, there was over 2 billion people in abject poverty in the world. Today, there's around 900 million.
Uh-huh.
And that happened largely because of free enterprise. And the United States has played a huge role in that. The dissemination of technology and all that has led to better lives for people. It's also led to some population growth, but I'm not too worried about that because it's supposedly going to top out with birth rates around 9.9 billion. But given that, we can't go backwards into a system that has been shown to restrict human innovation and restrict human resilience. And that's why I think the libertarian vision is the exact vision for the moment and for the future.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You know, we're the ones that want to set everybody free and give you the choices over your own life. And, you know, obviously if you have more choices, you can pick what fits you best and not have somebody dictate it to you, what is best for you.
That's right. The government's not visionary.
No.
Look at student loans, what they did. It's now the largest debt category. It's above consumer spending, it's consumer debt in the United States. A lot of people don't get out of it until they're almost 50, you know?
Yeah.
And
I was just reading an article thing on X today that they said that I can't remember, it was a wild percentage, but I wasn't surprised by it, by how many fast food jobs have been taken away by the raise of the minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and these kind of things where their heart might be in the right place, but you know, I always like to point out that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
My mom said that to us all her life. She would always tell us that. I like that saying. It resonates. But there's another thing. Government should not dictate. They should let the market dictate because people need laborers and they know how many they need and they have to pay a certain amount to get them in. And if there's competition for labor, they certainly will have to pay more, but they should let the market dictate that.
Yep.
That's the kind of overreach that stifles innovation, profitability, business. And we need to make money in California and make a rich state. out of what we have today. We need to reattract businesses, and especially the critical businesses of the future. But the real answer to your question is by cutting out the administrative overhead of the state. We would pay off, but before 2051, all of the debt of the state and all of the unfunded liabilities. And I would create with 25% of the savings, what I call the California Opportunity Endowment Fund, which is a fund that would be invested with private investment companies across the state. And I mean a lot of companies, so that if somebody is qualified to manage $20 million, that's a qualification. They don't have to be the biggest ones in the country. To invest in California businesses and to grow their capital so that by 2051 to 2053, the state would be endowed forever. They would have a $1 trillion fund. And that fund would endow government. There would be no more taxation.
I love the sound of that.
Think of that. Now think of that. Spending less than what we're spending today, saving money, and yet having our financial hotshot firms under, of course, definitions put forth by the government and agreed to by everybody, and not touched by government for special, you have to do this with the money or that. No, stand back, let them invest, and let them show their returns. And if they're no good at it, then the money be placed somewhere else. But just like in the real market, but eventually you could endow the government of California, investing in businesses in California and in Californians, and ultimately endow the entire tax base so that you would no longer have to have a tax base. Yeah. Except in maybe in a major emergency or something, or some kind of something unforeseeable. But
yeah, one of the things. Oh, for a little while we're going to pay this or something like that to do this, and then that goes away. But that's the thing with government; it tends to never go away once they start taxing you on something.
Right, but I would first do the cut. I would cut the costs and only use some of the savings for that. The CCCA that I propose also would be funded out of the cost cutting. But we would still 70% of all that cost cutting would go towards paying down debt, so that California has almost $1 trillion of debt. We pay it down, and we would ultimately we would be debt free. Now that's doable. I have the numbers in the back, and on my website I'm going to put all of the calculations. So if somebody wants to shoot at it, have at it.
Yeah, why don't you give out your website and any?
I don't have it yet up. I'm not going to have it up until the 10th of January.
Oh, okay. Do you know what the name of it's going to be or the link?
California 2051.
California 2051. And what about any social media where people can reach out to you or anything?
It'll be all of them. It'll be X, Facebook.
That'll be what they are. Okay. Mm-hmm. I always like to ask people on here. What was your road to becoming a libertarian? Like, who are your favorite libertarian authors or anything like that?
I first joined the Libertarian Party in 2016, like probably a lot of people, when Gary Johnson ran, and I was impressed by him, and I wasn't impressed by I was apolitical for most of my life. I didn't vote from 1984 until the year 2020. I tried to vote in 2016, but living in Mexico, I got scammed by a site that I found out later was put up by a Democratic Action Committee. And they said that they would, if you're living overseas, register here, we'll take care of everything, we'll get your ballot, we'll get you in. But when I said I was libertarian, I didn't get my ballot in time. It was like one of those. And I sent in money and supported Johnson's candidacy, but I did not. I wasn't able to get my vote in from there, but I thought I would be. But I voted the last two elections, and I think what has attracted me is that my philosophy. I've seen the vagaries of socialism in action. I've lived in a country that implemented socialistic policies. I've seen also what private initiative can do. I'm a bit of an initiator. I've been entrepreneurial with some of with the things I've envisioned. And I just believe in that as a much stronger and more relevant force on society than I do government. As I think government has an important function, but it's not the function to control like whether you have a stove or not.
Right.
I'm saying that's way. It's not that there's too much overreach. They exist to protect us, to at least ensure that things that we need in common, like roadways and parkways and flood control and things like that, are done. But it doesn't need to enter our lives and tell us what to think, and also censor us and superimpose some orthodoxy that they actually can't explain if you confront them on it. That affects our lives dramatically. Right now, we're about a third of the price of a gallon of gasoline in California is taxes, fees, and fees put on the refiners, and the extra cost. And by the way, here's something that I ran into in my research. It's crazy. Well, this year, 2026, and in 2025, we as a state have imported almost 24% of our gasoline, right? From China. China buys 21% of their crude oil from Russia. So about 5% of the gasoline that we're using in California came from Russia. How do you like that?
Yeah, and people think about it. I mean, it takes a lot of energy to transport that.
I have all those numbers, like the amount of carbon that's being put in the atmosphere to transport the fuel to get refined in China under very different refining standards and shipped then over to California creates way more carbon than we ever would have had if we refined it in California without the caps and without the carbon recapture programs and all that. It's ridiculous. And so we think we're cleaner. All we've done is export the problem somewhere else, and it's worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
but everybody, the powers that be have claimed victory over, hey, where we've lowered our carbon emissions.
Yeah,
that's
great. Also at a hand,
citizens are getting poorer by the moment, and they're paying 1/3 of the price that they're paying in gasoline is because of you guys. Where it didn't have to happen. I just visited outside the state, and in Utah, I paid $2.90. It's crazy. That's what the real cost maybe should be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is there anything you think that the voters out there would like to hear that I failed to ask or that I spaced out on?
No, just that I would encourage everybody. I think we need to mobilize to the best of our ability, because I think now is the time to cultivate and attract a lot of libertarians, because I think the operating philosophy of libertarianism is what is in order. It's what the country needs, it's what the state needs, and it's what we need as a society. And I think it would add a healthy dose of realism to the dialectic that's going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said at the beginning, I really appreciate you running. I really appreciate everything you said today. I think you hit on a lot of issues that a lot of people are scared of libertarians about, like the environmental stuff. And you've walked the walk and actually worked on making environmentally friendly policies and stuff like that. And I think that'll do the movement a lot of good. And I appreciate everything you said about that.
Well, thank you for your time, Sean, and I really appreciate it, and keep up the good work.
Yep, and that's an open invitation. As we get a little closer to the election or to the convention in February, I think that's where I don't know if that's where the party will endorse one of the people running or something like that. I'd like to get you back on the podcast and discuss things again and see how it's going.
Anytime, my friend. Let me know.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for listening to Libertarian Los Angeles on the Liberty Blues Network. Please be sure to like, review, and share it with your friends. We got a lot of libertarians here in California and Los Angeles and stuff like that. And, get the word out and pass it around. Check out my latest album, Free People, wherever you stream music. And you can follow me on X at Mad Sean Osborne. And we'll see you. And we'll see you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you. And we'll see you on the next episode of Libertarian Los Angeles.
Thank you very much.